The Vickers Wellington was a British twin-engined, long-range medium bomber designed in the mid-1930s at Brooklands in Weybridge, Surrey, by Vickers-Armstrongs Chief Designer, Rex Pierson in response to specification B9/32. Issued in the middle of 1932, this called for a twin-engined day bomber of higher performance than any previous design. It was widely used as a night bomber in the early years of the Second World War, before being superseded as a bomber by the larger four-engined heavies such as the Avro Lancaster. The Wellington continued to serve throughout the war in other duties, particularly as an anti-submarine aircraft. It was the only British bomber to be produced for the duration of the war and was still first-line equipment when the war ended. The Wellington was one of two bombers named after Arthur Wellesley, 1st Duke of Wellington, the other being the Vickers Wellesley. Design and development. The Wellington used geodesic construction, devised by Barnes Wallis inspired by his work on airships, and previously used to build the single-engined Wellesley light bomber. The fuselage was built from 1650 elements, consisting of aluminium alloy W-beams formed into a framework. Wooden battens screwed to the aluminium were covered with Irish linen, which, treated with layers of dope, formed the outer skin of the aircraft. The metal lattice gave the structure strength, because any one stringer could support some of the weight even from the opposite side of the aircraft. Blowing out one side's beams would still leave the aircraft as a whole intact. As a result, Wellingtons with huge areas of framework missing returned home when other types would not have survived. The dramatic effect was enhanced by the doped fabric skin burning off, leaving the naked frames exposed. In one incident, a German Bf 110 night fighter attacked a Wellington returning from an attack on Ma 1/4 NSTER, causing a fire at the rear of the starboard engine. Co-pilot Sergeant James Allen Ward climbed out of the fuselage, kicked holes in the doped fabric of the wing for foot and handholds to reach the starboard engine and smothered the burning upper wing covering. He and the aircraft returned home safely and Ward was awarded the Victoria Cross. The geodesic structure was strong and light for its size, which gave the Wellington a load and range to power ratio advantage over similar aircraft, without sacrificing robustness or the protection of armor plate or self-sealing fuel tanks. The construction took longer to build than other designs using monocoque construction and it was difficult to cut holes in the fuselage to provide access or equipment fixtures. The lee light was deployed through the mounting for the absent FN9 ventral turret. Nonetheless, in the late 1930s Vickers built Wellingtons at 1 a day at Weybridge and 50 a month at Broughton in North Wales. Peak wartime production in 1942 saw monthly rates of 70 at Weybridge, 130 at Broughton and 102 at Blackpool. The Wellington was built in 16 variants plus 2 training conversions after the war. The prototype, serial K4049 designed to ministry specification B September 32. First flew as a Type 271 from Brooklands on June 15, 1936, with Chief Test Pilot Joseph Summers as pilot. After many design changes, it was accepted on August 15, 1936 for production with the name Wellington. The first model was the Wellington Mark I, powered by a pair of 1,050 horsepower Bristol Pegasus engines, of which 180 were built. 150 for the Royal Air Force and 30 for the Royal New Zealand Air Force. The Mark I entered service with 9 Squadron in October 1938. Improvements to the turrets resulted in 183 Mark IA Wellingtons, which equipped the RAF Bomber Command heavy bomber squadrons at the outbreak of war. The Wellington was initially outnumbered by the Handley Page Hampton and the Armstrong Whitworth Whitley but outlasted them in service. The number of Wellingtons built totaled 11,461 of all versions, the last rolled out on October 13, 1945. A shadow factory was set up in 1938 especially to make wings for the Wellington bomber at Tresned Caerphilly, South Wales, operated by Welsh Metal Industries Limited, now Tresned Business Park. Setting the assembly record as a propaganda and morale-boosting exercise in October 1943, workers at the Broughton factory near Chester gave up their weekend to build Wellington No. LN 514 rushed by the clock. The bomber was assembled in 23 hours 50 minutes, and took off after 24 hours 48 minutes, beating the record of 48 hours set by a factory in California. The bomber was usually built within 60 hours. The effort was filmed for the Ministry of Information, for a newsreel Workers' Weekend, broadcast in Britain and America. Operational history. The first RAF bombing attack of the war was made by Wellingtons of No. 9 and No. 149 Squadron, with Bristol Blenheims, on German shipping at Bruinsboro 1/4 TTEL on September 4, 1939. During this raid, the two Wellingtons became the first aircraft shot down on the Western Front. Numbers 9, 37 and 149 squadrons saw action on December 18, 1939 on a mission against German shipping on the Schillig Roads and Wilhelmshaven. Luftwaffe fighters destroyed 12 of the bombers and badly damaged 3 others, thus highlighting the aircraft's vulnerability to attacking fighters, having neither self-sealing fuel tanks nor sufficient defensive armament. In particular, while the aircraft's nose and tail turrets protected against attacks from the front and rear, the Wellington had no defenses against attacks from the beam and above, as it had not been believed that such attacks were possible owing to the high speed of aircraft involved. As a consequence, Wellingtons were switched to night operations and participated in the first night raid on Berlin on August 25, 1940. In the first 1,000 bomber raid, on May 30, 1942, 599 out of 1,046 aircraft were Wellingtons. With Bomber Command, Wellingtons flew 47,409 operations, dropped 41,823 tons of bombs and lost 1,332 aircraft in action. Coastal Command Wellingtons carried out anti-submarine duties and sank their first enemy vessel on July 6, 1942. DWI versions fitted with a 48-feet diameter metal hoop were used for exploding enemy mines by generating a powerful magnetic field as it passed over them. In 1944, Wellingtons of Coastal Command were deployed to Greece, and performed various support duties during the RAF intervention in the Greek Civil War. A few Wellingtons were operated by the Hellenic Air Force. While the Wellington was superseded in the European theatre, it remained in operational service for much of the war in the Middle East, and in 1942, Wellingtons based in India became the RAF's first long-range bomber operating in the Far East. It was particularly effective with the South African Air Force in North Africa. This versatile aircraft also served in anti-submarine duties with 26 Squadron SAAF based in Takoradi, Gold Coast. In late 1944, a radar-equipped Wellington 14 from 407 SQN RCAF was modified for use by the RAF's Fighter Interception Unit as what would now be described as an airborne early warning and control aircraft. It operated at an altitude of some 4,000 feet over the North Sea to control a de Havilland Mosquito and a Bristol Beaufighter fighter intercepting Heinkel He-111 bombers flying from Dutch air bases, and carrying out airborne launches of the V-1 flying bomb. The FIU operators on the Wellington would search for the He-111 aircraft climbing to launch altitude, then direct the Beaufighter to the bomber, while the Mosquito would attempt to intercept the V-1 if launched. The Wellington is listed in the appendix to the novel KG-200 as one flown by the German Secret Operations Unit KG-200, which also tested, evaluated and sometimes clandestinely operated captured enemy aircraft during the Second World War. Variants Bomber variants Type 271, the first Wellington bomber prototype. Type 285 Wellington Mark I, one pre-production prototype. Powered by 2 Bristol Pegasus X radial piston engines. Type 290 Wellington Mark I, the first production version. Powered by 2 1,000 horsepower Bristol Pegasus 18 radial piston engines. Fitted with Vickers gun turrets, 183 built at Weybridge and Chester. Type 408 Wellington Mark IA, production version built to be Mark II specifications with provision for either Pegasus or Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, although only the 2 1,000 horsepower Pegasus 18 engines were used in practice. Main landing gear moved forward 3 inches. Fitted with Nash and Thompson gun turrets. 187 built at Weybridge and Chester. Type 416 Wellington Mark IC, The first main production variant was the Mark IC, which added waist guns to the Mark IA. A total of 2,685 were produced. The Mark IC had a crew of 6. A pilot, radio operator, navigator, bomb aimer, observer, nose gunner, tail gunner and waist gunner. A total of 2,685 were built at Weybridge, Chester and Blackpool. Type 406 Wellington Mark II. The B Mark II was identical to the Mark IC with the exception of the power plant. Using the 1,145 horsepower Rolls-Royce Merlin X engine instead. A total of 400 were produced at Weybridge. Type 417 Wellington B Mark III. The next significant variant was the B Mark III, which featured the 1,375 horsepower Bristol Hercules 311 engine and a 4-gun tail turret, instead of 2-gun. A total of 1,519 Mark IIIs were built and became mainstays of Bomber Command through 1941. A total of 1,517 were built at Chester and Blackpool. Type 424 Wellington B Mark IV. The 220 B Mark IV Wellingtons used the 1,200 horsepower Pratt & Whitney twin Wasp engine and were flown by 2 Polish and 2 RAAF squadrons. A total of 220 were built at Chester. Type 442 Wellington B Mark VI, pressurized with a long wingspan and 1,600 horsepower Merlin R6 SM engines, 63 were produced and were operated by 109 Squadron and as G radio navigation trainers. A total of 63 were built at Weybridge. The BVI's high-altitude fuselage design optimized for pressurization had a solid, bullet-like nose with no nose turret, and a cockpit with a Canberra-like bubble canopy. This is the aircraft that spurred Rolls-Royce into developing the 2-stage supercharged Merlin 60 series engine. Type 440 Wellington B Mark X, the most widely produced variant of which 3,804 were built. It was similar to the Mark III except for the 1,675 horsepower Hercules 6 or 16 power plant and a fuselage structure of light alloy, instead of steel. The Mark X was the basis for a number of Coastal Command versions. A total of 3,803 were built at Chester and Blackpool. Coastal Command variants Type 429 Wellington GR Mark 8, Mark IC conversion for Coastal Command service. Roles included reconnaissance, anti-submarine and anti-shipping attack. A Coastal Command Wellington was the first aircraft to be fitted with the anti-submarine Lee light. A total of 307 were built at Weybridge, 58 fitted with the Lee light. Type 458 Wellington GR Mark 11, maritime version of B Mark X with an ordinary nose turret and mast radar ASV Mark II instead of chin radome, no waist guns, 180 built at Weybridge and Blackpool. Type 455 Wellington GR Mark 12, maritime version of B Mark X armed with torpedoes and with a chin radome housing the ASV Mark III radar, single-nose machine gun, 58 built at Weybridge and Chester. Type 466 Wellington GR Mark 13, maritime version of B Mark X with an ordinary nose turret and mast radar ASV Mark II instead of chin radome, no waist guns, 844 built Weybridge and Blackpool. Type 467 Wellington GR Mark 14, maritime version of B Mark X with a chin radome housing the ASV Mark III radar and RP3 explosive rocket rails under the wings. 841 built at Weybridge, Chester and Blackpool. Transport variants Wellington C Mark 15, service conversions of the Wellington Mark IA into unmanned transport aircraft. Able to carry up to 18 troops. Wellington C Mark 16, service conversions of the Wellington Mark IC into unmanned transport aircraft. Able to carry up to 18 troops. Trainer variants Type 487 Wellington T Mark 17, service conversions of the Wellington bomber into training aircraft with air intercept radar. Powered by 2 Bristol Hercules 17 radial piston engines. Type 490 Wellington T Mark 18, production version. Powered by 2 Bristol Hercules 16 radial piston engines. A total of 80 were built at Blackpool, plus some conversions. Wellington T Mark 19, service conversions of the Wellington Mark X used for navigation training. Remained in use as a trainer until 1953. Type 619 Wellington T Mark X post-war conversions of the Wellington bomber into training aircraft by Boulton Paul in Wolverhampton. For navigation training, the front turret was removed and replaced by a fairing and the interior re-equipped. Some were sold to France and Greece. Experimental and conversion variants Type 298 Wellington Mark II prototype, 1 aircraft L4250. Powered by two 1,145 horsepower Rolls-Royce Merlin inline piston engines. Type 299 Wellington Mark III prototype, 2 only. Type 410 Wellington Mark IV prototype, serial A1220. Powered by two Pratt & Whitney twin Wasp radial piston engines. Type 416 Wellington. The original Wellington II prototype was converted with the installation of a 40mm Vickers S gun in the dorsal position. Type 418 Wellington DWI Mark I, conversion of 4 Wellington Mark IAs to minesweeping aircraft. Fitted with Ford V8 petrol engine and Maudsley electrical generator to induce magnetic field and a 48 feet diameter loop mounted under fuselage. They had a solid nose with a bracket supporting the loop, which was also supported under the rear fuselage and the wings, outboard of the engines. DWI stood for Directional Wireless Installation, a cover story for the true purpose of the loop. Type 419 Wellington DWI Mark II, DWI Mark I aircraft upgraded by installation of de Havilland Gypsy engine for increased generation power. At least 11 further aircraft converted to this standard. Type 407 and Type 421 Wellington Mark V, second and first prototypes respectively, 3 were built, designed for pressurized, high-altitude operations using turbocharged Hercules 8 engines. Wellington Mark VI, 1 Wellington Mark V with Merlin 60 series engines, high-altitude prototype only. Type 449 Wellington Mark VIG, production version of Type 431. 2 aircraft were only built. Wellington Mark VII, single aircraft, built as a test bed for the 40mm Vickers S gun turret. Type 435 Wellington Mark IC, conversion of 1 Wellington to test turbine light. Type 437 Wellington Mark IX, 1 Mark IC conversion for troop transport. Type 439 Wellington Mark II, 1 Wellington Mark II was converted with the installation of a 40mm Vickers S gun in the nose. Type 443 Wellington Mark V, 1 Wellington was used to test the Bristol Hercules 8 engine. Type 445 Wellington, 1 Wellington was used to test the Whittle W2B/23 turbojet engine. The engine was fitted in the tail of the aircraft. Type 454 and Type 459 Wellington Mark IX, prototypes with ASV Mark II, ASV Mark III radars, and powered by 2 Bristol Hercules 6 and 16 radial piston engines. Type 470 and Type 486 Wellington, this designation covers 2 Wellington Mark II aircraft fitted with the Whittle W2B and W2/700 respectively. Type 478 Wellington Mark X, 1 Wellington was used to test the Bristol Hercules 100 engine. Type 602 Wellington Mark X, 1 Wellington was fitted with 2 Rolls-Royce Dart turboprop engines. Wellington Mark III, 1 Wellington was used for glider tug, for glider clearance for Hadrian, Hotspur and Horsa gliders. Operators: Australia, Canada, Czechoslovakia, Free France, Germany, Greece, New Zealand, Poland, Portugal, South Africa, United Kingdom. Aircraft on display. There are 2 complete surviving Vickers Wellingtons preserved in the United Kingdom. Some other substantial parts also survive. Wellington IA serial number N2980 is on display at Brooklands Museum at Brooklands, Surrey. Built at Brooklands and first flown in November 1939, this aircraft took part in the RAF's daylight bombing raids on Germany early in the Second World War but later lost power during a training flight on December 31, 1940 and ditched in Loch Ness. All the occupants survived except the rear gunner, who was killed when his parachute failed to open. The aircraft was recovered from the bottom of Loch Ness in September 1985 and restored in the late 1980s and 1990s. A new Wellington exhibition around N2980 was officially opened by Robin Holmes, Penelope Keith, Norman Parker and Ken Wallace on June 15, 2011, the 75th anniversary of the first flight of the type's effective prototype in 1936. Wellington T-10 serial number MF628 is held by the Royal Air Force Museum. It was delivered to RAF No. 18 Mew for storage at RAF Tynwald Downs, Dumfries, as a Wellington BX, on May 11, 1944. In March 1948 the front gun turret was removed in its conversion to a T-10 for its role as a Pasteur aircrew trainer. The RAF Museum later refitted the front gun turret in keeping with its original build as a BX. In autumn 2010, this aircraft was taken to the RAF Museum site at Cusford for restoration over the next 4 or 5 years. Specifications. Data from Vickers aircraft since 1908. General characteristics: crew, 6, length, 64 feet 7 inches, wingspan, 86 feet 2 in, height, 17 feet 5 in, wing area, 840 FTA squared, empty weight, 18,556 pounds, max takeoff weight, 28,500 pounds, power plant, Tua, Bristol Pegasus Mark 18 radial engines, 1,050 horsepower each, performance, maximum speed, 235 miles per hour at 15,500 feet, range, 2,550 miles, service ceiling, 18,000 feet, rate of climb, 1,120 feet per minute. Wing loading, 34 pounds FTA squared, power mass, 0.08 horsepower per pound, armament, guns, 6-8er, .303 Browning machine guns, Tua, in nose turret, Tua, in tail turret, Tua, in waist positions. Bombs, 4,500 pounds bombs. In popular culture, the Wellington was nicknamed the Wimpy by RAF personnel, after the portly J. Wellington Wimpy character from the Popeye cartoons. Wellingtons appeared in several films made or set in World War II. Target for tonight, a documentary about a Wellington on a raid over Germany. One of our aircraft is missing, about the crew of a Wellington forced down in the Netherlands. Workers' Weekend, a documentary newsreel about the construction of Vickers Wellington Lane 514 in record time. Wellington Bomber, a 1-hour documentary about the construction of LN 514. Very Important Person, in which the title character sucked out of a hole in the fuselage of a Wellington over Germany. Beatar JEZDCI, about a Czechoslovakian bomber crew in the RAF, based on the real operations of No. 311 Squadron RAF. The Winds of War, Episode 4, depicts Wellingtons making the first Allied raid on Berlin. The play Flare Path by Terence Rattigan depicts the crew of a Wellington before, during and after a bombing raid. See also, 1942 Ruislip Wellington accident, Dumfries and Galloway Aviation Museum, related development, Vickers Warwick, Vickers VC-1 Viking, aircraft of comparable role, configuration and era, Armstrong Whitworth Whitley, Douglas B-18 Bolo, Handley Page Hampton, Hinkle He-111, related lists, list of aircraft of World War II, list of aircraft of the RAF, list of aircraft of the RNZAF. References, notes. Bibliography. External links, RAF, Vickers Wellington, Wellington bomber crews and their experiences. A Polish Wellington bomber pilot recalls his war, cover illustration August 1940 Popular Mechanics, Wimpy, a detailed illustrated history of the Vickers Wellington in service, 1938 to 1953 by Steve Bond.